Our next talk is emergency response to drought, the City of Cape Town's groundwater abstraction and MAR scheme. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm David McGibbon from Mvoto, Africa, and I'll be discussing the Cape Flats Aquifer, emergency response to drought, and lessons learned with implementing a groundwater scheme that includes managed aquifer recharge in a developing country in a rush. The Cape Flats Aquifer is within the city of Cape Town, South Africa, at the southern tip of Africa. It's the second largest, it has the second largest population in South Africa. It's a major harbor on international transport routes and known as Africa's most popular holiday destination. The city of Cape Town and the majority of the Western Cape relies solely on surface water for its supply. And in 2015, when rainfall started to decline, the dams started to dry up, as can be seen by the images there. That's Cape Town's largest dam. This got to a point where it looked likely that in the next summer, the dams would dry up and the city would run out of water fully, which had people queuing up to try to fill up bottles with spring water. This just adds to that. You can see this is rainfall data from 2 weather stations at the major dams, how bad the drought was and how low it was compared to the average rainfall for each weather station. This extreme drought, however, is expected to become the new norm with climate change going forward. Predictions show that for South Africa, the western half of the country will dry up where Cape Town exists, and the eastern half of the country will get wetter with more extreme events as seen by the flooding in Mozambique recently. The city of Cape Town's historical response to drought was a very successful water conservation and demand management plan, which really curbed consumption, even though population growth continued, as you can see by the red and blue lines there. And then in 2017, as day zero approached, they put in really strict restrictions, which actually saw consumption halved from the city. But ultimately, with continued growth, they needed to diversify their supply. So in 2017, they started an emergency response, which included desalination, the reuse of treated effluent, and various groundwater schemes. One of the groundwater schemes is the fractured aquifers of the Table Mountain Group, which is the mountains that surround Cape Town there. I can't really point, but it's in the mountain ranges. And then the other is the Cape Flats Aquifer, which I'll be focusing on. The Cape Flats Aquifer is a coastal primary sand aquifer that underlies the majority of the city. The urbanization that covers the majority of the Cape Flats is informal settlements with little to no formal infrastructure and sanitation. This does pose a challenge where there are various contamination sources throughout, and also a second challenge is its proximity to the coastline, so any large-scale abstraction has a risk of seawater intrusion. As the project began, the project team really wanted to go in with a no-regrets approach, so they never wanted the emergency supply to foreclose the full development of what the ultimate project could be. And that the long-term project included the reduced risk of negative effects like seawater intrusion. There's also sensitive ecosystems that rely on high water tables during the year, and existing users, like there's a small farming group in the middle of Cape Town that relies solely on groundwater. So this was put up from the beginning that the emergency couldn't have a negative effect on the long-term plan, which was adopted by the city of Cape Town, but this created other challenges that you had to implement the full project in an emergency timeline. The result of this was that there was no time for pilot studies. We had to adopt a learn-by-doing approach, which in some cases resulted in doing exploration and production drilling simultaneously, and also designing and constructing pipelines and treatment works without even completing the drilling in that area. Managed aquifer recharge formed a crucial part of the long-term full implementation of the project to enhance storage and yield from the aquifer, act as a seawater intrusion barrier, in certain areas act as a pollution barrier to protect the well field from potential sources, and also protect these sensitive ecosystems. Here's just an example of the risk of seawater intrusion, particularly because the majority of the abstraction well fields are located very close to the coastline, because that's where the thickest part of the aquifer is. A MAR scheme with groundwater really adds resilience to a municipality. It allows you to continue to supply water even through extended droughts, as shown by the simulation of a 10-year drought. So now we knew why we wanted to do it, and we had to work out how we were going to do it. So we identified two sources of water for the recharge: stormwater and treated effluent. Stormwater, however, varies in quality quite drastically, and also the volume is not constant, particularly during a drought. Treated effluent, on the other hand, had fairly constant volumes, and by upgrading the treatment works, you can manage the water quality. The next problem was how are we going to do it? Were we going to use infiltration or injection? Looking at that, we looked at land availability, the underlying geology, which is predominantly a primary sand aquifer, but there are many clay lenses that extend throughout the aquifer. Infiltration requires quite a large area, and in an urban environment like Cape Town, where you have population growth, people flocking to the city looking for jobs, it makes land a very sensitive topic, where any open land's fought over for housing, farming, or to protect it as a natural environment. So you can see in this image how the last remaining open areas in the last year, informal expansion has just totally taken over them. We also then we selected injection because it was a mechanism of getting past the heterogeneity in the aquifer, especially in the short term, that you could focus your recharge where it's required, like in a seawater intrusion barrier. So after we weighed up all of that, we opted for an aquifer storage, transport, and recovery scheme that included using high-quality treated effluent from wastewater treatment works. This, however, did not close the door on stormwater. Stormwater infiltration forms part of the long-term sustainable urban design of the City of Cape Town and will form part of the full project. Looking at it, we know that the source of water for recharge schemes is often the one item that really holds a scheme back to its full success. The legislation in South Africa is not quite adequate for this, so we adopted the Californian standard for the reuse of treated effluent to reduce any health risks. This resulted in including a residence time within the aquifer, which we had to include in readjusting the design of the scheme. We also wanted the water to be of a very high standard to minimize the chances of clogging, physical, chemical, and biological. And for that, we've also built in quite a robust operation and maintenance plan that includes the rehabilitation of boreholes. In terms of operating the scheme, the plan is to operate it on a water level basis. So for abstraction, to ensure that you don't over-abstract, dropping the water level too much to negatively affect existing users and the environment. And then on the injection side, to make sure that you don't cause flooding. We also want to make sure that there's space in the aquifer to accommodate seasonal rainfall, like winter rainfall, and maximize the storage in the aquifer. So over the last year and a half, we've encountered many challenges. Some of these being the difference in timelines and funding between developing the groundwater project and then the different timeline for the upgrade of the treatment works. What this results in is that the funding available for the groundwater project and the drilling has to be used up in 1 to 2 years, but the upgrade of the treatment works for the recharge will only be available in 4 years. So we have to complete the drilling of all injection boreholes before being able to actually test it with the final source water. which does pose a serious challenge. To overcome that for the short term, we've opted to use what available water we have, which is groundwater, because it's a drought, you can't use potable water. So we've used that to test the hydraulics of individual boreholes to at least get the design correct and be able to go forward. Access to land, not only large space, but also because of the short timelines, you can't drill on private land. It takes too long to get access to that, so you have to target land owned by the City of Cape Town, which doesn't always necessarily correspond with the best part of the aquifer. Social buy-in. Because of the emergency response, decisions were made and the project started rolling out. There was no time for public participation. This needs to be addressed immediately now, because if communities go against the use of treated effluent, this could hold back on the success of the final project. Security and vandalism in a lot of developing countries is a problem. Particularly in the Cape Flats, gangsterism is rife. Contractors during the implementation of the project are getting robbed and mugged constantly. And then looking forward for the full project, we've got to look at ways, how do we protect the infrastructure going forward? How do you ensure that it doesn't get vandalized and that holds the whole success up? These are just some images of day-to-day life on the Cape Flats, pollution, gunfights. So it's quite a tricky environment. We have, however, learned many lessons up to now, and I'm sure we'll continue learning them. The main one is crisis leads to action. For decades, specialists in the field have noted that the Cape Flats is a great resource that underlies the city and really needs to be protected. However, it took the crisis for it actually to start being developed. And also, you cannot implement a groundwater scheme overnight. You need to have implemented it prior to the crisis arising so that you can actually utilize it when it's needed. Expect the unexpected. This happens on a daily basis where new things pop up. For instance, poor land management and urban growth has resulted in things like wastewater treatment works with unlined sludge ponds being built or constructed on top of the highest productive zone in the aquifer, or finding ammunition buried in certain areas. Also, working on any municipal project, never underestimate the red tape associated with it. The timelines put out were pretty extreme, yet it still took 6 months to appoint the first driller to be able to start drilling boreholes, purely because the supply chain management holds everything up. And then what you need to do is really develop a national skill set where municipal managers, engineers, scientists all work together. Because these projects are so large scale and complex, it doesn't only rely on a scientist. You need all parties aiming together for the final goal and communicating constantly. Various delays that we have encountered is purely because of a lack of communication. So going forward, that is something that we're really striving to work on, to get everyone on the same page and working towards the final goal. And that is that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for McGibbon? Here, in the back. Oh, here's one. It's very hard for me to see because the light is in my eyes. I think it's Peter.
Thank you, Jeff Campkin, University of Western Australia. Really nice presentation, very powerful final messages of the lessons learned. In early 2000s, Perth, Western Australia had really serious water supply problems, not as serious as Cape Town got to. I was fortunate to visit Cape Town to learn some lessons from Cape Town of what was being done at that time in Cape Town, and there was an extraordinarily good program happening there. Yet you ended up where you did in 2017. In your view, what happened or didn't happen to allow you to get to that position in 2017 after being, at the forefront of some of this sort of communication programs, early 2000s?
Yeah, thanks. I think it was actually the success of their water conservation and demand management program that they kept putting out the other schemes, putting it out longer and longer because of the success. Additionally, also, I think in South Africa, groundwater is not fully understood by particularly municipalities, where in other parts of the Western Cape, they would have artesian boreholes, and it wouldn't have rained for 2 years, but they still think the best option is building a dam. So it takes, I think in South Africa, it takes a long time for people to actually look at groundwater schemes, but ultimately that delay, I think it was actually because of the success of the previous one, and then they weren't planning for an extreme drought like that.
Thank you. I think I saw a question in the back, or am I mistaken? Well, I actually have a question since you do have a minute. So with the Cape Con, this is the Cape Town case, it's really a nice case for climate resilience. Do you see like what other, you already have so many challenges, but you haven't really done the real treated wastewater injections. What are you anticipating when you start to have, toilet to tap, essentially?
In terms of the community,
Probably.
Previous studies have been done on direct reuse of treated effluent in Cape Town. It's not, I won't say everyone accepted it very well. Going forward, I think a lot of work needs to be put in now. We do have a period of time available to do it. And another side might be that I know they are busy implementing a separate direct treated effluent project, and the chances are that it might be a case of it's been in the system for 4 months already, no one's complained, no, it's fine. But yeah, no, a lot of work needs to be brought in to educate people and bring them up to, you're going to run out of water without this in place, and what is worse.
All right. Thank you. If no further question, I'd like to thank Dr. McGibbon one more time.